Hi there once again. Thank you so much for joining us back here at iLuminate. Once again, my name is Johnny Fredman. I am a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Oklahoma. Thanks so much for checking in with us and joining us once again in this issue. I want to continue something that we began talking about a couple of issues ago, and that is the issue of addictions. And as we mentioned before, typically when we talk about addictions, people think about things like drugs and alcohol. But those are not the addictions that I want to talk to you about. The previous time that we addressed addictions, we talked about the issue of video gaming and video game addiction. And I shared with you that the American Psychiatric Association is very strongly, very seriously considering adding video game addiction to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, which is kind of the guidebook that we use here in mental health to diagnose things. And so it's very, very likely, in fact, that video game addiction is going to become a diagnosable mental illness, much like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, things of that nature. But there's another one that's being looked at, and it's not necessarily looked at in the same way by some people, but the research is telling us that it really is. The research is starting to tell us very strongly that this issue can be at least just as addictive as all of these others, just as addictive as the drugs and alcohol, just as addictive, if not more so, than the video games. And it's an issue that is really becoming a problem not only for young people, but for adults as well. And one of the difficult issues with this particular addiction is that you have access to it this very moment. In fact, you probably have access to it almost all the time, 24/7. So it's very easy to obtain, and it's very insidious in how it grabs a hold of a person and the damage that it causes in their life. The addiction we're going to talk briefly about in this issue of iLuminate is the issue of pornography. Pornography is becoming a huge, huge problem for young people and adults alike. I personally have friends who were preachers and youth ministers who have lost their job because they were caught in their church office looking at pornography. As I work with people, I'm studying and becoming certified to deal with sexual addictions as a therapist, and I'm finding more and more people. The reason I went to this training was because more and more people are coming to me with marriage problems, with just problems in their life centering around often pornography. And if you have a smartphone of any sort, you have the potential to access this. If you have internet access, which you do, or you wouldn't be able to watch this issue of iLuminate, then you have the potential to access this very, very deadly, deadly sin. Pornography is not just something to look at for fun. It's not fun and games. Pornography grabs a hold of a person. It grabs a hold of your brain and literally changes the way your brain works. It changes the way your brain functions. It changes what is called your arousal template. And the younger that you look at it, the more damage it can cause. Now, that's not to say that people who began looking at pornography as adults don't have issues with it as well, because again, I have people who meet the classic criteria of an addiction with pornography who didn't begin until they were adults. But we know as your brain, as a young person, is continuing to grow and continuing to develop now, even into your mid-20s, the earlier exposure to things like pornography that you have, the more that it changes your brain structure, and the more it changes the neural pathways that your brain uses to function properly. And when we look at pornography and how it affects a person, we do find that very, very often it meets all of the classical things and classical signs associated with addiction that we would look for in drugs or alcohol or any other type of addiction. You see, pornography changes the way that your neurons fire in your brain. And so what happens is a person has to have those particular images or those particular sites in order to become aroused. And that can be a sexual arousal. It could also be other types of arousal. But what can happen when a person gets heavily involved in the use of pornography is it is not all that uncommon for a couple to come into my office And in order for them to be intimate together in any way, pornography has to be used. It has to be looked at before one or the other person can become aroused to even be with their spouse. And that's hard to compete with. That's hard to compete with as a spouse, to think, oh, my spouse has to go look at someone else before they can become interested in being with me. It's very damaging to a relationship, but it's very damaging to a person. It's very damaging to the person who's having to look at that pornography in order to gain that arousal that they need. Some people, it's not just the sexual arousal, though. Some people have to look at things like that in order to be able to function, to go to work, in order to be able to go to sleep at night. It depends on how they've programmed their brain to deal with this horrible, horrible addiction that they have developed. And again, at this moment in time, I realize that pornography addiction is not in our DSM manual that we have, but there's a lot of things that aren't in that manual that people struggle with. And it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing. But when we look at pornography and when we look at what it does to a person's brain, we see again that it meets the classical signs, the classical conditions that we have for addictions. So what might we notice, or what might we want to look at to see if a person is struggling and becoming addicted to this thing we call pornography? Well, there's a few things. Number one is, how much time is a person spending on it? How much time is a person spending looking at pornography? How is that affecting their life? Are they late for school? Are they late for church? Are they late getting around to things because they're spending so much time looking at pornography? Are they hiding it and keeping it secretive? That's a classical sign of someone who is potentially addicted to something. Is it interfering with their life? Again, do they miss appointments? Are they late for things? Do they fail to accomplish tasks that they needed to do? They don't do their homework because they're so busy looking at pornography. Do they try to stop and they're unable to? If a person is looking at pornography and they want to stop and they know it's wrong and they just can't seem to stop themselves, that is a major sign of someone who's potentially addicted to this issue. Or perhaps they've gotten caught, or perhaps they have consequences. Maybe they've lost their job. Maybe they're having problems in other areas because of pornography, but they keep doing it even though they're having all these negative consequences. Those are all different signs that we might look for to tell us that a person is struggling in this area, potentially facing an addiction to pornography. But even more than the earthly consequences, even more than the addiction issues, we need to remember the spiritual side of things. Pornography draws us away from God. It's a tool of Satan to damage us spiritually. Matthew 5:28. Jesus says that if a man looks on a woman to lust after her in his heart, it's the same as committing adultery. To look at someone in a lustful way, to look at them lustfully and commit adultery in your mind, is the same as committing the act in God's eyes. It's as if you went ahead and went all the way. So spiritually, pornography is very damaging to one's relationship with God and to their brothers and sisters in Christ, because typically we want to hide that as a Christian. We don't want people to know that we're struggling with this area of sin in our lives, and so we pull away from our brothers and sisters in Christ. And therefore it causes more and more problems in our lives. And as we pull away from our brothers and sisters and our friends, we pull away from God and we lose that support network that we need to be able to overcome these temptations, to be able to overcome this sin that's in our lives. So what about you? Is this perhaps an issue in your life? What should one do if pornography were to be an issue, if you were to be struggling in this area, or at least have concerns? Number one, find someone you trust and talk to them. Ideally, an adult who has some wisdom in life, a therapist, a preacher, a teacher, a Bible class teacher, an elder. Find someone that you trust that you can share this with. It's very, very, very important that you do that. It's okay to talk to, if you have some good, solid Christian friends, it's okay to talk to them as well. Find someone you can trust that you can share this with, and you'll be amazed at how much that alone helps to be able to get this burden off of your chest and off of your heart and be able to share it with someone that you trust. Let them be an accountability partner to help hold you accountable for the things that you look at, the things that you see, the things that you do. Then you might need to change some of your habits and your patterns. Perhaps you don't need to be alone with the computer. Perhaps all of your computer work needs to be done out in the presence of someone else or in the family room. You can also place blocking programs on your computer and on your phone as well. Have someone else choose the password for you, or use a random password generator program to create a password that you don't know so you can't get around it. There's many other things. Change your habits, change your behaviors, your patterns of what you normally do so that you don't fall into that same pattern, that same routine. But talk to someone. Find someone that you trust who can help you with this issue if it's something you're struggling with. Because my friends, this is a problem in the church. It's a problem in our world, and it is growing exponentially. But Satan is getting hold of us Christians in the church as well. Pornography is not a game. It is not a form of entertainment. It is something that degrades the person who's being looked at. It's also something that degrades the person who is doing the looking. There are no winners in pornography. Everyone involved is a loser. Everyone involved is placing themselves at risk physically, emotionally, and spiritually. So please be aware of this issue. If you've not gone there, if you've not ever looked at pornography, don't start. But if you have, and you have some struggles and you have some concerns, find someone to talk to so we can help. Once again, I'm going to put my email address down here. If you have any questions, if you have any concerns that I can help with, if you have something you'd like to see us address in this segment in the future, be sure and let me know. We want to be able to do that and want to be able to meet your needs. But until next time, remember that we love you. Thank you for checking in, and we will see you next time.